this video, we'll be looking at how to do unobtrusive JavaScript. This is kind of like a continuation of what we've seen so far. We have seen like how to write, add code to JavaScript and tie them to our HTML elements. We've also seen how to access HTML using the JavaScript document object model. So today what we are going to be doing is like a little bit of like separation of layers. So if you think about any architecture, so there is a user interface, then there is like a web designer to do like the design, then you have your web developer doing your HTML, and then you have your backend developers working on like actual logic, right? So just and then you have your databases that store your data. So there is always a need for separation of concerns just to keep everything clean. So what I mean by that is, right now the way we've written HTML, we have JavaScript inside the HTML, which is not separation of concerns. We are putting business logic inside HTML. So we are having more than one file that we have to change. Let's say like something happens and we don't want this change size function anymore. Or, there's like, something happens and then you just want to like change what's in your JavaScript, but you also have to, instead of the on click, you have to make it as a mouse over, the change size, and should also do something else. Then you have multiple files that the logic is lying around in. We just want to like keep them as one package. Anything that is JavaScript, we want to keep inside the JavaScript file. Anything that is HTML, we keep in the HTML. All we do is add a reference to the script, and that's about it. That is kind of the goal. We did that already for the CSS. We are not having any inline styles. So a couple reasons is because you have reusability, and also it is very clean that you don't have to touch multiple files when something changes. And that it is much more readable, and definitely it gives you that separation in terms of like what each file is meant to do. So this is what the basic foundation of unobtrusive JavaScript is, to keep it as separate as possible. Another reason why we might want to do that is, like, let's say like this change size does not exist. Let's say this guy, I for some reason changed it. This function does not exist in my JavaScript. So let's see what happens. Let me see. So that was in the 300 pixel one, box 1. Okay. So if I click on this guy, so there is an error right now. It's throwing an error. So depending on if you do it here, or what if like this change length was called, at the beginning of something else. So what will happen is, for example, if you call a So what happens is that any execution that happens, okay, let me just change it a little bit. Like, let's not change the name of the function. Let's just change size, right? Also, we do not want any changes to JavaScript to affect HTML in a way that it stops execution of the program. So that is the reason why we want to keep them all separate. So in that way, what happens is, if something is wrong with the JavaScript, it just errors out, but it does not stop the user from navigating the website. So that is the reason why we go for unobtrusive JavaScript. So how do we go from having a call here to a JavaScript to not having it but still making it work? So that is what we are going to be doing. So we talked about events before. We looked at like how we do like an on-click event, and then we looked at window load. Events are like predefined actions that trigger some reactions. So you click on a button, something happens. You move mouse over a button, something happens. You change text inside an input box, something happens. So those are events, and there is a lot of predefined events, and there is reference to it in your W3 schools if you look up events. So right now, when you do this, we are saying that on click of this button, this function will be called. So this is one way of calling it, and there is another way of calling it from JavaScript directly, and those are called as event listeners. So you can add an event listener to any of the elements on your HTML. So an event listener is the same as adding this statement. So just because you added this statement doesn't mean it is going to immediately fire this event. It will fire the event only based upon the event on click. Okay, so let's try this first guy. So for this particular demo, I'm going to be using the week 6 code and then changing it. So when I click on button 1, I don't want anything here in my HTML. So my JavaScript has all my functions. So the first thing I have to do is any event listeners go inside window.onload event. So let me just first write this. This is going to be an anonymous function. So what happens? Why do I need this? Why do I have to put all my event listeners? It's not any event listener. Any DOM related code has to go inside the window.onload. It just cannot be here by itself. The reason being, this area, the global area as I call it, gets called as soon as the window is in the browser. But we want to make sure that the entire HTML is rendered and all of your elements are already created on your page before you call your DOM code. Anytime you say document dot get element by ID or one of those guys, the document should be first ready. Outside, like for example, if I don't do this and I try to get an element here, let's see what happens if we do this. So my code is here. So button 1 is null. If you try to use button 1, so the reason being, this page is not fully rendered. But if you were to do 10, the page would have been already rendered, so button 1 will work there. So let's do a console.log here. Okay, I just did a console log. Let's kill this guy, refresh the page. So the first time when it came in line 6, it wrote null because the button was not there. But when we wrote in line 11, the button actually exists. So all of your DOM related code has to be inside the window.onload, unless it is inside a function where it does not just directly get called. So how was this handled when we had it all in the HTML? It's because the HTML as it renders, it is linking this guy. So it rendered the element and then it is linking it to an on-click. That is the reason why it wasn't a problem.